Preparing the project for the marketplace. If you don't know already, the project is now available to purchase on the marketplace, and that's what I've been working on in the past few weeks. I had to set up a few things here and there because it was not as simple as just uploading the project on the marketplace. I had to do a few changes here and there so the project is compatible with the requirements of the marketplace. And since I still want to continue updating the project we use in the tutorial series and also the project that is on the marketplace at the same time, we are going to redo those changes in our project. That way I don't have to do the work twice every time we want to add a new feature. So anyway, all that to say that today we're not going to add a new feature, we're not going to touch the code really, we're just going to fix one or two bugs here and there, but we're mostly going to rename some files, put them in the right folders, and make sure that the structure of the project meets all the requirements. So let's get to it. So the way it works, when we try to upload a project on the marketplace, Unreal has to go through it and make sure that it meets all the different requirements. Those requirements are just to make sure that all the projects on the marketplace are built more or less the same way and following the same guidelines. So if someone buys multiple projects on the marketplace, it's not going to be that different going from one project to the other. And it also makes sure that all the assets that are available to purchase on the marketplace are a good enough level of quality. So like everybody else, I read all the different guidelines and I was pretty sure that my project was good enough, but looks like it was not. So I sent my project to Unreal and they sent me back that list with all the fails that I had to fix if I wanted to be able to upload my project on the marketplace. And these are the things we're going to modify today. So first, they didn't like the structure of my project, so we're going to modify the structure a little bit just so it's similar to all the other projects on the marketplace. Then we're also going to take all the assets that we used as example in the project and move them inside a demo folder so the user know that these assets are not part of the core mechanics of the project. They are just there to show that the mechanics are working. And by those assets, I mean the different units and their animations, the different icon we used throughout the game, and also the different levels and environment pieces. So all those assets are going to go inside a demo folder. And finally, there was some missing prefixes in front of different textures, blueprint, and widget blueprint. So we're going to add those also. And that's pretty much it. So let's get to it. But now, before we get going, there's one last really important thing to do, and it is to back up your project. I don't know if you're using source control already, but you really should if you're not. Here it is. I have my GitHub project that is working right here. So I'm using source control, and I hope you are too. But if you're not, make sure to copy your project somewhere, make a backup. I don't know how you want to do it, but just do it because we're going to rename a bunch of assets. We're going to rename a bunch of files, and that might cause a bunch of random issues that are really painful to fix. So please make sure to back up your project before doing anything else. And now that that's said, let's get to it for real. The first thing we're going to do is actually to rename the project because I don't want my project to be named Tactical Tutorial on the marketplace. That's a bit weird. So I'm just going to rename the projects folder to Turn-Based Tactic. That's the name I chose. So here it is. I have my Turn-Based Tactic folder, which is the root of my project. If I go in there, I have everything I had before, including the U project file that I'm also going to rename the Turn-Based Tactic U project. And now the project is renamed, we can open it. And here we go. Now we're in Unreal. Unreal is open and I have my new project name, and it actually didn't break anything, and it should not break anything actually because it's super simple to rename a project. It doesn't cause any issues. The problems are really happening when we are trying to rename the assets that are inside the project. And that's what we're gonna do because the first requirement that was not met by the project is that my project needs to have a root folder containing all my assets. So I have another folder under content that is going to contain everything, and that folder should have about the same name as the project name, so Turn-Based Tactics. So let's do that. I'm going to create a new folder in content, a new folder right here that I'm going to rename Turn-Based Tactic, and we're going to place everything inside that folder. So I'm going to select everything else and put it inside Turn-Based Tactic, move here. Here we go, Unreal is done working, and now I still have some ghost folder right here, so I'm just going to make sure to fix up my redirectors, making sure everything is clean in the project, because that's also a requirement by the marketplace, and it's also just better to save everything all the time to make sure that it is clean. And now I'm going to delete the art and blueprints folder because they are now inside the Turn-Based Tactic folder. Here we go, it doesn't seem to cause any issues. I'm just going to fix up once again to make sure it works, and I'm going to close Unreal and reopen it, making sure that everything went properly. So let's wait for Unreal to reopen. And now I'm just going to look at the log. I have my output log right here. I'm just going to check and make sure that I don't have any red lines in there, because if I do, it's probably because an asset wasn't linked properly, and that's not good. We have to fix it as soon as possible, otherwise it's going to cause more issues later. But in my case, since I don't have any red in there, I'm pretty sure that everything went properly, and now that's good. We can go to the next step, which is to actually move the art and maps folder inside the demo folder, because that's the folder that is going going to contain all the example content of the project. So anything but the blueprints folder is going to go inside that other folder. So right click, new folder, I'm going to name it demo, and then I'm going to move the art and maps inside that demo folder right here. So perfect, Unreal is done working. I'm going to do the exact same thing and fix up the redirectors one more time. Here we go. Then I can delete the art folder from here because it's just a ghost folder. There's nothing in there. And finally, I'm just going to save all, make sure that everything is saved, close Unreal, and then reopen it to make sure that everything went properly once again. So back in Unreal, I'm just going to scroll through the log, making sure that I don't have any red in there, and that seemed to be fine. Good. Okay, so now we renamed most of the assets, and that's pretty good. Now I can just relink my maps because now we can see that I don't have my default map open. So I'm just going to go in my default map and open level main menu because that's the default level we want to play. And I'm just going to try it just before making sure that everything is good. And actually, that's not good. I have the default pawn right now. I don't have my pawn that I should have. Yeah, that's not good. Let's just stop. I'm going to go in my maps and mode to relink everything. So in edit, project settings, and then I'm going to go in maps and mode. We have to relink the editor starter map and the default map. So I can just relink them because I have it selected in the content browser. So the level main menu, we can look for it if you want. And then I have my BP game mode right here, BPGM, and that is the game mode we want to use for that game. And it contains the pawn and the player controller. That should fix all the issues we currently have. So I'm just going to close those, and now I can play the game. And I should be back inside the level main menu. I have my main menu right here. And if I open any of the maps, it should open properly. Does it work? Yes, it's good. And now if I try to generate my grid, I'm just going to, here we go. I can generate the grid. I can start a combat. Actually, I have to add a few units in there, making sure that everything works as perfectly as it was before. And now I can move around, and that seemed to work perfect. So we didn't break the project. The project's still working. We just had to relink a few things, but at least it's done and now it works. Good. But we're not done. We still have a bunch of cleanup to do. So I'm gonna go back in my content browser right here. In my demo folder, in the art folder, we have the units right here. And inside that folder, there's an enum, actually a few enums and an interface, a blueprint interface, and they should not be there. They should be inside the blueprints folder. And that was an issue from a long time ago that I didn't fix. I knew that was there, but now we have to move it to the right place. And that's gonna be inside the blueprints core, inside the units right here. Oops. Units, we have the utilities folder, so let's just move them in there because it makes more sense. So in my units folder right here, I'm just going to grab my blueprint interface and my enums, move them inside my units, inside the utilities folder right here, move here. Same thing, I'm going to fix up the redirector, making sure that it still works, and save all, making sure everything is saved properly. I'm not going to restart Unreal just yet because I'm pretty sure that those changes are not going to break anything, and if they do, well, too bad. I hope I'm not wrong. Anyway, so now I'm gonna go back in my units right here. We have the Bat Chicken Priest, and that's going to contain all the demo asset that we have. So the animation blueprint, all the animations right here, the skeletal mesh, and finally the icon. And as per the requirements of the marketplace, we have to have one folder per asset type. And they really didn't like that my animation blueprint was with the animation, with the mesh, with the texture. So what we're gonna do is just create a bunch of folders to contain all the different asset types that we have right here. So new folder, animation, blueprints, here we go. Then I'm going to create another folder for the animations, and then one for the mesh, so meshes. Here we go. Finally, a last one for the textures. So textures, we only have one texture, one animation blueprint, but whatever, that's what they are asking for. So let's do that. I have my 4 folders, and before I move my assets inside those folders, I'm just going to duplicate those folders inside all the other units because it's just going to be faster than creating them all manually. So copy here in the slime, copy here in the ranger, same thing in the priest, same thing in the chicken. Here we go. So now all my different units have these 4 folders, and now I can go through all those units and move the asset in the proper folder. So the animation blueprint inside the animation blueprint, the animations inside the animations folder, these 3 assets, so the skeletal mesh, physical asset, and skeleton can go inside the meshes folder, just like that, and the icon goes inside the texture folder. Let's do the same thing for the chicken. So I'm gonna move my chicken right here, my chicken animations, here we go, my chicken mesh, just like that, inside the meshes, and finally the texture inside the texture. Perfect. The priest now. Here we go. So now all my different asset types are in their specific folder. So texture, meshes, animation, animation blueprint, texture, meshes, animation, animation blueprint, texture, meshes, animation, animation blueprint, blah, 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 for all my different units. Perfect. Now I'm just going to fix up the redirector one more time. Doop, doop, doop. Wait for it to be over. I'm going to save all, making sure everything is saved, close Unreal, and then reopen it, making sure that I didn't break anything one more time. Back in Unreal, I'm just going to go through the log, making sure that I don't have any red anywhere, and that's pretty good. And if I play the game, I don't have any errors. I can start a combat, and it should work as before. Here we go. I can move my units around, and it seemed to work. Perfect. So that's good. Now we're not done. We still have one more step, and it is to add the prefixes in front of all the different asset types. So if I go in my filters, I have my blueprint classes. I also have my textures that are missing some prefixes, and finally the widget blueprints. Here we go. So I have all these. So if I look at my blueprint classes, some of them don't start by BP underscore. So I have my actions right here that don't start by BP underscore. The BFL underscore is fine. The BML underscore is fine too. The BPI is good. These BP actions, here we go. All of these are BP, BP, BP. So these are all good, but these are not because they have to start by BP underscore. So we have to rename all of those. Then in my textures, I have a few textures. Actually, I have a bunch of textures, all of them that don't start with TX underscore like these one do. So we have to change those also. And finally, in the widget blueprints, we have to add the prefix WBP underscore at the beginning of the widget's name. And that's actually a prefix that I never heard of before. That's a pretty weird one in my opinion, but whatever. We have to add that prefix in front of all my widgets because none of them are using that prefix. So we have to rename a bunch of things, a bunch of widgets, textures, and blueprint. And I don't want to do all that by hand. Instead, I'm just going to write a bit of code that is going to rename the asset for me. So let's do that. And that's actually something we didn't do before in this series, and it is to execute some editor code and to write some editor code that have access to all the assets that are inside the content browser. We have to go through a specific class. Actually, if you want to do it in Blueprint, if you want to do it in C++, that's not an issue, but in Blueprints, you have to go through a specific class, and the class is editor utility that we have right here. And in my case, I'm going to use the editor utility widget because it's just simpler. So let's do that. Editor utility widget. The name doesn't matter because we're going to delete it later because we don't want to have the editor utility widget on the marketplace. Actually, the marketplace doesn't want to have that, so we can't really keep it. We have to delete it afterwards. So we're just going to have it while we are renaming our asset, and then we're just going to delete it. So let's open the widget. It's the same thing as any other type of widget. It's just a widget blueprint. So in there, I can add a button that is going to run my code. So I can have a big button. I'm going to place it right here. It's pretty nice. The name doesn't matter because we're going to delete it. So let's just keep it right here. Then I'm going to scroll at the bottom and implement the unclicked event. And that's the event we're going to call that is going to rename our assets for us. And the way we're going to do that to access all the assets in the content browser is by simply getting all the assets that are going to be selected. So I'm going to select a bunch of assets in the content browser, and then when I'm clicking on the button, it's going to retrieve all the assets from there. Then I can simply loop through all those assets and rename them. That's super simple. Rename the assets. And the way I'm going to rename them, since we just want to add a prefix at the beginning of the name, I'm just going to do exactly that. I'm going to take the asset name and add the prefix that I want to add at the beginning. And in this case, we're going to start by the blueprint asset. So I'm going to add BP underscore at the beginning of the asset name, and that should rename the asset properly for me. So I'm just going to compile this widget. I'm just going to save it also. Here we go. Now I can go back in my content browser, and to run that widget, I can just right click on it and click on run editor utility widget. That's going to open the widget for us. Here we go. I have a new tab with a nice button inside it. If I click on that button, it's going to add the prefix in front of my assets. Actually, we can test it on this one. I can click, select my asset right here, and I can click on the button. Here we go. Now it should rename. Oh, it crashed the editor. Yeah, I guess you can't really rename an editor widget while it's running. Yeah, that makes sense. Anyway, let's reopen Unreal and don't mess with the widget this time. Oh, actually, now that Unreal is reopened, we can see that it worked. It crashed the editor, but at least it renamed the asset. Now my asset is named BP underscore whatever that was written before. So perfect. I can reopen it, make sure that the code is still good. Yeah, the code is still there. That's good. And now we can use that widget to rename all the other blueprints, the one that we really want to rename, not that one. So now I'm going to reset my filter because it broke them. Here we go. Now I have all my blueprint classes right here. I'm going to select all the ones that don't have the BP underscore prefix. So all of these, yeah, okay, all of these right here, all the actions at the top. Then these BFLs are good, BPI, BP action, all of them have BP at the beginning, BP, 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 BP. Okay, all of these are good. Now I can click on my button and it should rename all those assets. So let's do that. Click on the button and wait for Unreal to do the magic. I know it's taking a bit of time, but it's faster than doing it by hand. Okay, so it seemed to be done, and now all my action starts with BP underscore action, BP underscore, BP underscore, BP underscore, and that's pretty good. Okay, good. I'm just going to save all. Now I'm gonna go do my textures. So let's reset the filters. So instead of blueprint class, I'm going to filter my texture right here, and now we have to add the TX prefix at the beginning of the textures that don't have it. So all of these right here, oh, this one right here. So now I'm going to go modify my code to append that prefix instead. So let's close the widget first, otherwise it might crash Unreal one more time, so we don't want that. Then go back in the code right here and change the append right here to TX underscore for the textures. TX underscore at the beginning of the name. Let's compile and save the widget. Now I go back in Unreal and we want to run the editor utility widget. Run right here, and now I have my widget. Now I can select my texture filter, select all the textures that don't start with TX. So all of these, all of these, all of these, all of this up to here. Okay, all of these. And then if I scroll down just to make sure, TX, 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 TX. Okay, all the other ones are good. So just all of these, and then I can click on my button. Unreal is going to rename them for us. There we go, now Unreal is done. Every textures start with TX, so it seems to be done properly. Yeah, that's good. Okay, all the textures start with TX, that's good. Let's close this one, and now we have to do the widget blueprint. So in my filters, I'm going to go select the user interface. Oops, I don't want all of those, I just want the widget blueprints. Anyway, I just have widget blueprints in my project, so it doesn't matter. And now what we want to do is to append the WBP underscore at the beginning of all those widgets, because I'm not using that prefix anywhere in my project, but in my case I was using the W underscore prefix that I have right here, and right here, and in those cases I want to replace that W underscore by the new prefix. We don't want to have both prefixes at the beginning, so I'm gonna go back in my code right here and I'm going to do a replace first. So replace, I'm going to replace the prefix underscore W underscore right here to nothing. So I'm going to delete W underscore from the string, and then I'm going to append the right prefix, so WBP for widget blueprint. Perfect. Now I can compile, save this widget, go back in the main menu and run this editor utility widget one more time. Now I'm going to do it for my widget blueprint, so I can just select all my widget blueprints that are in my project and now click on the big button and hope it works. Here we go, Unreal is done, and now all my widgets are starting with WBP, 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 WBP everywhere, and no widget starts with WBP underscore W underscore underscore whatever. So it's just keeping one prefix, and that's pretty good. Okay, good. We're done renaming, so let's close the widget utilities blueprint because we don't need it, and actually we have to delete it because otherwise the marketplace is not going to like them. So let's delete that one, save all, make sure everything is saved. I'm going to fix up my redirector one more time, making sure everything is good, and actually don't close Unreal just yet. Before doing that, just make sure to resave all your assets that are inside the blueprints folder. Because I don't know why, but it seems like Unreal doesn't save all the assets properly when we rename them by code. I really don't know why it's happening. But if I look at my widget blueprint right here, we can see that none of them have the dirty star that is appearing at the corner of those widgets. And if I do a save all, no assets are saved because Unreal thinks that they are all saved properly, but they are not. I noticed that before and it broke all my project and it was a pain to fix. So instead of having to fix all these assets manually, I'm just going to resave everything, and that should make sure that everything is saved properly and everything should work once we reopen Unreal. So let's just save all, making sure everything is clean. So resave all your blueprints before closing Unreal. It's really important, so just do it. And now I can just close Unreal. Here we go, and reopen it and hope for the best. So Unreal is reopened. Now I'm gonna scroll through the log, making sure I don't have any red in there. That's pretty good. Now I'm going to press play and hope it didn't break. So, okay, first the main menu starts properly, so that's good. Going to start in one of my level. I have a level loaded properly. I have my units. I can end my combat and my turns. Okay, I'm gonna test my debug map now because that was one of the problem that I saw before. So let's just make sure the grid generates properly. In my combat, I can add the units as before. That's pretty good. And now I can start the combat. There we go. Everything seems to work as before. That's pretty great. Okay, good. We didn't break anything. That's a really good news. Okay, yeah, that's good. Most of the job is done. Now we just have to fix a few bugs here and there that I saw while I was renaming things for the marketplace. And the first one I saw is inside one of our action button, the button that finds a path to a target. So I'm going to look for find path to target, WBP button action find path to target that we have right here. Going to open the widget, and here in the graph at the end we are executing the action right here that sets all the variable, and then we are waiting for a really small delay. But during that delay it's possible that the action was destroyed. It's really rare, but sometimes it happens, so it causes any issues when we try to generate the reachable. So what we're going to do is just to make sure that the action is still valid before we try to generate the reachable, so we don't have a weird error. So I'm just going to check here if it is valid. It's valid. Here we go, in between the delay right here and the moment we generate the reachable, that we were sure that the action was not destroyed. In the meantime, perfect. So let's compile and save this button. That's done. Now let's go to the next one. And that one is related to the Slomo console command. All the console commands are not working in a shipping package. So if you package your game in a shipping mode, the function is not going to work because it's a console command, and console commands are not available in the shipping package. So what we're going to do is go replace that function by a global time dilation. So let's go inside the combat widget because that's where we are using this. So WBP combat, this new prefix is messing me up. There we go, WBP combat, here it is. And here in the corner, in the bottom left corner, we have the time dilation right here. We have the Slomo time 1 and Slomo time 3. We're going to replace them by the real way of doing things. So let's go right here. And instead of the execute console command, we're going to set the global time dilation. Here we go. Set global time dilation by 1 when it's going back to the real timing, by 3 when we want to speed it up, and go back to 1 right here when we destroy the widget. So we can just delete the execute console command right here, and right there. Here we go. Connect the set global time dilation instead, and that should fix the issue. Now the speed modifier of the game should work also in a package build, so that's pretty good. And now the next bug only happens in the debug map, and it's only happening when a unit tries to cast a spell. So I'm going to add a unit on my grid, and then I'm going to select the unit and try to cast a spell from it. So cast a spell, and you can see that the log is a big mess. Yeah, that's not great. And if I stop, well, yeah, I have a bunch of errors everywhere. And that's only happening because in the combat system, when a unit casts a spell, it goes to the next unit afterward. Actually, it's not really the case, but let's say I'm gonna show you. If you go in the combat system right here, I'm gonna go in the cast spell function. So cast spell right here. So this is the function that casts a spell. It does everything. It does the logic. It's pretty nice and awesome and everything. And if you go all the way at the end right here, if the current unit died while casting the spell, so if the current unit killed himself, it's going to the next unit. But right now we don't have a current unit valid. We're not in combat, so the current unit doesn't exist. And since the unit doesn't exist, the isAlive function returns false by default, which means that the combat system is going to try to select the next unit, which is not possible because we're not in combat. So anyway, I'm just going to check to make sure that the current unit is valid before trying to check if it is alive, because it's not going to be alive if it's not valid. So let's just add an is valid right here. Here we go. Here we go. And that's it. That should fix the bug. So let's close the combat system now. And now back in my debug level, I can select my unit and try to cast the spell, and it doesn't break anything. The log is nice and clean, and that's pretty nice. So good. I can cast any spell that I want from my unit. That's all right. Perfect. But there's another bug. Now, if I press stop while the unit is selected and ready to cast a spell, if I press stop, it's going to freeze a little bit, and then it's going to dump a bit of log in the output log. A bit of red, a lot of red actually, and a bit of yellow right here that gives us a little bit more information. That error only happens once per time that Unreal is open. So if you didn't reset Unreal in a little bit, you probably don't see that error. But if you restart Unreal and you try to reproduce it, you're gonna see that the error appear, and we're gonna have to fix that. And what's happening is that we're trying to create some widget while the world is getting destroyed. So the world right here, we can see that it is getting destroyed, and we are trying to create we are trying to create a widget while the world is being destroyed, and we don't really want to do that because the world is being destroyed, the game is over. We don't want to try to create widget at that moment, and that's why Unreal is confused a little bit. It's like, the game is ended, why are you trying to create something? That doesn't make sense. So let's fix that. I'm gonna go where this is happening, and this is happening inside the button spell, but that's actually not the button spell. This is the widget we are trying to create, but the place we are creating it is inside the button action cast spell right here. This is where we have the list of buttons. So let's go inside that widget, button action cast spell. Let's open that one. This is the list of buttons we are regenerating, and we don't want to do that anymore. So let's go in the graph, and this is happening right here in set spell list, which is called every time the selected tile change, and at the end of the game, the player deselect every tile. So it's calling this function right here, which is going to regenerate the list, which is going to spawn another batch of widgets, and we don't want to do that. So we're just going to unbind that callback right here from the callback at the same time as the player is getting destroyed in the game. That way, when the player gets destroyed, we're not going to regenerate a list of spell, and we're also going to take the time to unbind this callback right here, because why not? There's a bunch of logic right there that we don't want to execute while the game is ending. So let's just not do it because, well, that's not clean. So let's just bind ourselves to the end play callback. So bind the event to end play. We're going to create a matching custom event. So custom event right here, and we're gonna use that custom event to unbind the other callback. So in the player action right here, we can unbind event from unselected action change right here. We can connect it like so. The event is going to be the same event that we used to bind it, so that one right here. And then we're gonna do the same thing with the other event that we have right there. So unbind event from unselected tile change, just like this, and the event is going to be the same as the one down there. So I'm just going to add a reroute node right here and connect it like so. And actually, I'm gonna do the same thing right here. So add a little reroute node. Oops, I didn't reconnect the right one. There we go. There we go. That's a little bit more clean. We can see that both those events are connected together. It's not that clean, but whatever, it's going to be good enough for now. Let's compile, let's save this widget, and now I'm just going to restart Unreal to see if the bug happened again. Perfect, so I restarted Unreal. Now I'm just going to select my unit and cast a few spells, and now if I press stop, I should not have any errors in the log, and I don't, so that's pretty good. We can go to the next bug. And the next one is also related to the unit casting the spell in the debug menu. If I try to cast my first spell here a few times, we can see that I can only cast it once, but I can cast my second spell as many times as I want, and that's the behavior it should be. So the reason why that's happening is because this first spell has a 1-turn cooldown, and we're never resetting the cooldown in the debug menu. So that's what we're gonna go do. We're just going to go reset the cooldown inside the spell cast in the BP action cast spell, not the one in combat, but really just the one in the debug menu. So in this one, at the end of the execute action, so execute action, casting the spell, and at the end we were resetting the action point and movement point. Now we're also going to reset the amount of time the spell was cast this turn, and also the spell cooldown. So reset both of those, and now we should be able to cast the spell as many times as we want. Let's go back in the game to see if it worked. And now if I select my unit and I do a right click, I can cast my spell as many times as I want because the cooldown is reset. Perfect. And now the next two bugs are related to the tactical grid. I'm not going to show you what's happening because we don't really see much, but I'm going to try to explain them to you while we are fixing them. So it's going to be in the grid visual, BP grid visual. It's going to be inside the set is tactical function where we are enabling or disable the tactical grid. And the first bug is right here all the way at the end. This is where we are updating the tiles of the grid, but when we are trying to either enable or disable the tactical grid without the grid being generated. So the grid doesn't exist quite yet because the grid is not generated, and we are trying to update the data that is inside the grid, and that's not gonna work. So what we're gonna do is just check to make sure that the grid is valid before trying to update its data. And as I said, that's just going to happen in the case that you're trying to either enable or disable the tactical grid before the grid is generated. Then for the second issue, it's also inside this function, so I'm going to go back a little bit and I'm going to add a little sequence right here. And the problem that I want to fix is related to the collisions. Right now, the tactical grid has collisions, which makes sense when the grid is visible. When we are not in tactical grid mode, we don't want the tactical grid to block the collision. Otherwise, it just feels weird because you're moving your mouse over invisible objects and they are blocking the line trace. trace, and that's not what you want. So what we're going to do here at the second step of my sequence, I'm just going to either enable or disable the collision depending if the grid is in tactical mode or not. So here I'm just checking if my grid is valid because of the same reason that we have right here. If we are enabling the tactical grid before the grid was generated, this grid mesh int is not going to be valid, obviously. And then if it's valid, I'm just going to set the collision enabled if we are in tactical mode, so it's enabled here. Otherwise, it's going to be disabled, so it's not going to block the mouse cursor when the tactical grid is hidden. I hope those explanations make sense, and now we can go to the next bug. And now the next bug is related to the overall behavior of the cursor while hovering the grid. It's something that is super clunky, and I should have fixed that a long time ago, but I didn't, so now we're gonna do it today. And as you can see right here, if I move my mouse left to right here, it selects the tiles that are on the right, going up and down. That's a bit weird. Same thing if I do it right here, I'm just selecting random tiles. When I'm outside, it doesn't break too much. While I'm here, yeah, we can select the tiles that are above ground. Yeah, it's a bit weird. And even worse than that, if I move my mouse outside of the viewport, it selects this tile that is right here. Outside of the viewport, it selects a tile by default. In the viewport, it's fine. Outside, it breaks. So yeah, we have to fix that also. While the mouse is not on the viewport, it should not select a random tile that is on the grid. So yeah, that's not that great. So we're gonna fix all that today. So stop, and that's gonna be inside the BP grid. So let's open the BP grid that we have right here. And the first thing we're gonna fix is the random tile that becomes highlighted when we move the cursor outside of the viewport. And that's gonna be inside the get tile index from world location. So we can go in there, and in there we are taking the world location on which the mouse is hovering, and then we are calculating the tile index. But nowhere in here we're checking to make sure that the world location we receive is valid. So what we're gonna do is do it right here. Why not? So at the beginning, I'm just going to make sure that the location we receive as input is valid, so it's not equal to -99, -99, -99, which is my invalid number that I'm using everywhere in the project. And if it's not equal to that, well, we can execute the rest of the logic, but otherwise, if it's 99, we're just going to return -99, -99, because the world location is invalid, so we can return an invalid tile index also. And that should fix the problem that the tiles become highlighted for no reason. Now, the next issue is related to the collision of the grid, and that's going to be inside the get cursor location on grid right here. And right here, we're checking multiple things. We're checking first if we are over the grid right here. Then we are checking if we are over the ground. And finally, we are checking if we are over a random invisible plane around 000 in your world. But we don't always want to do all these three steps. Maybe when we are in combat, we only want to use the grid. That just makes sense. It's just more stable if we only use the grid. But when we are not in combat, let's say in overworld, then we might want to use the ground instead, because the grid doesn't exist yet, so we have to use the ground if we want to spawn the unit in the overworld. And finally, the invisible plane, that's just going to be useful when we want to spawn a new tile on the grid in the debug menu. So depending on the context, we're going to call a different bit of code. So either this one, or that one. So what we're going to do is go back all the way at the beginning, and I'm going to add myself two new boolean that's going to tell us which part of the code we want to execute. So one boolean right here to trace for the ground, and one boolean right here to trace for the empty space. So we're going to specify if we want to use the ground and the empty space in the calculation. And then what I'm going to do is just add myself a little sequence right here at the beginning. So in any cases, we're going to trace for the grid because the grid is the most stable thing we have. So we always want to use the grid. Then if the line trace of the grid didn't work, I'm going to add a little if right here to check if we want to also trace for the ground. If we want to also trace for the ground, we're going to do the line trace for the ground. And finally, a last little if right here connected to the then2 right here. If we want to trace for the empty space, we're going to trace using the plane around the empty space. And now, since everything is connected to that sequence at the beginning, we don't need to have the else if right here. So I'm just going to disconnect the false, false, and the false. And I'm going to return this part right here, the part that returns an invalid position at the beginning right here at the end of the sequence. So if the first sequence fires and we detect the grid, it's going to return a position on the grid. Then it's going to check if we want to trace for the ground. If we trace for the ground, it's going to return a position for the ground. And finally, last thing, for the empty space, it's going to try to check a position on the empty space, and if none of them worked, it's going to return an invalid position like before. And while we're here, I'm just going to also check this little checkbox right here, the trace complex on the grid, because I think it gives me a better result. It's not always the case, but I think in my case, the behavior is a little bit better when we check that checkbox, so you can experiment on your side. But in my case, I'm just going to leave it checked. Perfect. So now we're done fixing this function. This function is not good, but we changed the definition of the function. So now we have to go everywhere in the project where this function is used to be able to reconnect those inputs. So I'm just going to do a find reference on the function, which is used in this blueprint. So I'm just going to go right here, and it is used right there. And what I'm going to do, I just want to keep it simple. I'm just going to reconnect those two pins at the beginning like that. So we can also feed those information to the get tile index under cursor, which is then going to feed it to the get cursor location on grid. But that also means that we have to go check everywhere in the project where this function is used, because we also change its definition, but we're going to finish with this function first. So and now we know that it's not used anywhere else in this blueprint. I'm just going to click on the looking glass right here to find in all the blueprints in the project, and I have one reference right here in the WBP tab grid. So let's open that one, and here we can see that we are using this function. And in my case, I'm just going to check all those checkboxes right here because it's for debug, and I think that it's a good idea to use all the different parts of the code when we are trying to debug it. Oh, okay, I forgot to compile the first blueprint, so that's why it's complaining. Compile it, and now it can compile this one. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so now the widget uses the new inputs, and it should work. Good. Now we can go back in the finding blueprints, and this function was not used anywhere else in the project, so that's pretty good. Now we can go back in the BP grid to do a find reference on this function right there. So the get tile index under cursor find reference, looking glass to look through the whole project, and now we have one reference in the WBP tab grid, which is the same. We just checked those checkboxes, so that's pretty good. It's done already. And now I'm gonna go back in the finding blueprints, and it is also used inside the player action. So let's go in there. And here, since it's a little bit more complex than the widget, because these variables are going to vary depending on the context, depending on which action we are trying to execute, I'm going to create two new functions to tell us if we want to use the ground or the empty space in our calculation. So let's create two new functions right here. I have two new functions. The first one is can over ground. So that one is going to tell us if we want to be able to over the ground or not when we are doing a line trace. This function is pure and returning a boolean at the end, telling us if we want to use the ground. And the situations we would like to use the ground is when we are trying to either add or remove a unit from the overworld. So this is the first action. And the second action is when we are trying to move a unit in the overworld. In those cases, the grid doesn't exist, so we have to use the ground of the overworld if we want to add a unit or move the unit around. And for the function that tells us if we want to over the empty space or not, it's pretty similar. So it's a pure function that returns a boolean at the end, so pure return boolean, and we just want to use the empty space when we are trying to add a new tile on the grid. So when we are trying to add a new tile on the grid, we are trying to add the tile on top of the ground, and if it doesn't work, it's going to also try to add the tile on top of the empty space, and that should work also. Perfect. So now we just have to go use those two functions when we are doing our line traces. So I'm going to go back in my finding blueprint and click on the first function right here, and I'm going to connect my two new functions just like that. So can over ground, can over empty space is going to tell us if we want to trace for the ground or trace for the empty space. And then I'm going to go back in my finding blueprint and also connect it inside the get unit under cursor. So right here, I'm going to do the same thing, connect my two functions right there. Perfect. And while we're here, I'm also going to check this little trace complex checkbox right here because I think it gives a better result. Perfect. So now it should fix the cursor behavior. So let's go test in the game. Okay, so it seemed to work because now when I move my mouse over the grid, it seems way more stable. When I'm hovering the empty space, it doesn't select a random tile. Same thing if I'm hovering right here or right there. And if I move my mouse outside of the viewport, it doesn't select a random tile either. And we should still be able to add and remove tiles from the empty space. So I can have my tiles right here. I can add them right here. Right there. It seems to work also. So that's pretty good. It seems to work as before, and it seemed to have fixed all of our issues. Perfect. And actually, while I was fixing that previous bug, I remembered a little something that is a little bit weird in the code, so I'm just going to show it to you. I'm gonna go in my add remove unit from overworld action, that is right here, so BP action add remove unit from overworld, and here inside the execute action, so where we are adding the unit in the overworld, at the beginning we are checking to make sure that the index of the grid is not equal to -99, which actually makes sense most of the time when the grid is generated and exists, but if the grid doesn't exist, that's always going to be -99, so that's not good because it means you'll never be able to spawn a unit in the overworld, and actually the unit in the overworld should not care about the grid, so you don't really need that bit of code right here because you're not going to add the unit in the grid, you're going to add it on top of the overworld. So we can just delete it and connect it back like so, and that should fix a potential issue that could happen if you don't have a grid in your world. Perfect. So that should fix that issue also. And now this next bug is caused by Unreal 5. It's working pretty well on Unreal 4, but I don't know why on Unreal 5 is not working. And the bug is related to the level loading and the navigation system. It looks like the navigation system doesn't generate properly if you load the level right away. You have to give it a little bit of a delay before loading the level, otherwise the navigation doesn't get generated. I don't know why it's happening. So anyway, it's inside the level loading, so level loading blueprint, and it's only happening in the begin place. So once we start the game, we are loading the level we want to load. But if we do that too fast, well, the navigation doesn't get generated. So to fix that, what I'm gonna do is just load it a second time. So that's super cheap. I don't like that, but whatever. We're going to fix that in the future. Right now, I just wanted to upload my project on the marketplace. So yeah, that's the cheapest way I found to fix it. So adding a delay right here, a super small delay, and then reloading the level one more time. That should not break anything. It's not pretty, but at least it worked. So yeah, that fixes the navigation, and that's dirty, but whatever, it works. So let's close it and save all that. And that brings us to the last few things I'd like to fix, and it is related to Unreal 5 one more time, and that one is really important, so I wanted to show it to you. If I go in Unreal 5, here we go, we can see that all the buttons have a little outline. It's ugly, but it's not too bad, so I'm just going to keep it as is. But if I go in my debug map right here, we can see that we have a few issues. It's combining shader, it doesn't matter. But if I go in my camera right here, no, that's fine. Okay, these combo boxes, if I open them, we can see that the text inside them is not readable. That's not great. So I'm going to fix that. We can fix it in Unreal 4, and that's going to also fix Unreal 5. So that's pretty good. So that's why I'm going to fix it. And the other thing is inside the spells, I think. If I try to cast a spell, yeah, you can see that the buttons are pretty ugly. Yeah, the buttons are not great here. So we have to fix that. I'm not sure if the units button, no, the units button are pretty nice. So that's good. Okay, I'm just going to go see all the other levels, making sure that the levels are good. So let's go in this one, just making sure that the combat widget is fine. Yeah, it seems all right. Maybe it's not the most perfect widget ever, but whatever, it seemed to work and it doesn't break, so that's pretty good. But yeah, the spells button are really ugly, so I'm going to fix the spells button. So we don't have much to fix, we just have to fix the spell button and the combo boxes that are in the project, so let's go do that. I'm gonna go back in Unreal 4 to do that. And the first thing we're gonna fix is the spell button, because that's the ugliest one. So let's go in the WBP button spell, I think. Yeah, WBP button spell. Let's open that widget. And the problem that is happening in Unreal 5 only is just because the button, the default setting of the button changed in between Unreal 4 and Unreal 5. I don't know what. I mean, I don't know why they did that. That sound weird to me, but whatever. In the style of the button, the normal padding and the pressed padding changed in between Unreal 4 and Unreal 5. The default values are different. So in our case, the default values are 2 and 2, 3, whatever. But in Unreal 5, the default values are different. They are not 2 and 2, 3 like that. So it means that the button in Unreal 5 is going to behave differently than the button in Unreal 4 by default, unless we change the default values, so they are not going back to the default values while they are in Unreal 5. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, what I mean is that if we change those values, so if let's say I change my 2 to 2.1 right here and this one to 2.1 also, it's going to display the yellow reset icon right here, which means that now these values are not using the default values that are coming with Unreal, meaning that now Unreal 5, when it loads the button, is going to detect that these values are not the same as the default ones, so we should use those values instead of using the default values that are coming with Unreal 5. And we have to do that just because the default values between Unreal 4 and Unreal 5 are different, meaning that if they are using the default values of Unreal 5, it's going to have a weird behavior like they do right now. So if we are overwriting the default values, it's not going to use the default values, but our values. I hope that made sense. But anyway, if I go in my level now, it should work as before because I'm on Unreal 4 and I don't want to break my button. So yeah, I can click on my buttons and it works. So that's pretty good. And it's also going to work in Unreal 5. I'm going to show it to you a little bit later because now we have to fix the combo boxes, and it's pretty much the same thing. They change the default colors that are appearing on the text in the combo boxes. That's, I don't know why they do that, but anyway, so in there I'm going to look for all my combo boxes that are in my project. So I'm using them inside the tab grid, I think, tab grid, and also inside another widget. What was it already? I don't remember. It was the show spell range pattern, WBP button action, so spell range pattern. That's a long one, but yeah, we have two combo boxes right here, and inside the tab grid we have two combo boxes also right here and right there. So these combo boxes are using default values for the color of the text that appears on them. So in the item style right here, this is the text that is appearing when we click on the combo box. They are using the text color to show themselves, and by default it's white, and that's pretty good. But in Unreal 5, well, it's black. I don't know why. Anyway, so let's just change that to something a little tiny bit different. So let's say click right here. Doesn't matter as long as it's a bit different than the default value. So it shows the little arrow right here. And now it means that the text is not going to use the default color, but the color we inputted manually right here. And that's going to be white, and that's good. It's going to be readable even if the background is black. Because yeah, black on black doesn't really work that well. I don't know why they did that. Anyway, let's go back inside the second widget that uses the combo boxes in the project. Good thing we don't have that many combo boxes in the project. So let's select those two combo boxes, do the same thing in the item style. We can change the text color to something a little tiny bit different. Here we go. We don't even see the difference, but now they are not using the default values, so they should work in Unreal 5. Just to make sure, I'm just going to test in Unreal 4, making sure I didn't break anything. So I'm just going to go in my pathfinding. I think that was the one to do. Actually, in my grid, I have my combo boxes right here, so that's good. We can set text. That's pretty good. And now I think it's in the spell. No, show spell branch pattern. Here we go. So I have combo boxes right here and right here. Here we go. We can see the text, so that's pretty good. So now let's jump in Unreal 5 to make sure that it worked. Now I'm back in Unreal 5, and now we can see if the text are readable now. So I'm gonna go in my combo boxes right here, and now we can see that the text is white, so it's readable. That's pretty good, because that was pretty annoying that we're not able to read that text. And now in the spells, I'm gonna do the same thing. Look at the spells icon, and they are square. That's great, because we want them to be square, so that's pretty good. And the spell range, same thing with the combo boxes. Yeah, they seem to work, and now the text is readable also. Great, so that's perfect. That was everything we needed to do today to be able to upload the project on the marketplace. Things that you can't really do because it's my project and I'm selling it on the marketplace, but I'm doing it, so that's pretty good. Yay, project on the marketplace, that's an achievement. Woo! Anyway, but yeah, the next few videos are going to be maybe a little bit boring for most of you, because it's just going to be a recap of all the main features of the project and how to use the project, mostly for people that are going to buy it on the marketplace. But it's also a good source of knowledge if you don't really remember how to create a unit, how to create your levels, how to create a new spells and things like that. So yeah, it might be interesting or not, depending if you remember everything I said before this video. Yeah. Anyway, you'll see if you like them, watch them. If you don't, well, whatever. We're gonna see each other when I try to implement the real features, the one that you suggested during the year and also in the polls. So I'm going to come back to implement those features, and these videos are probably going to be more interesting than all the how to create this or how to create that videos that I'm going to do next. But anyway, that's going to be for later, but I'm gonna see you in the next one. Bye bye!